Right, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for making some time. I'm sorry that I was confusing the 30 minutes in my head when it's shorter than that. So we'll jump right in since we're recording it.
That's okay.
My screen so we can pull up an image on the screen as well of the work, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's great.
We'll start with this one. And so, as I shared um, in my remarks, what I really appreciated about your work was the sort of arc of history, and in sort of exploring your website, realizing how important that is across all of your artwork. And I think that's really compelling and interesting. And I want to step out of the way and let you sort of speak to that. But before we even get to that, maybe talk a little bit about your process, which also seems connected to that arc.
Okay, yeah, no problem. As a visual artist, I've always painted, and I'm also a collage artist. I started doing collages in 2017. But when it comes to painting and just visual arts, since I was born, I've always been interested in art. But as far as the collages, it really comes with the vision.
Mm-hmm.
And after I get that vision, I sketch out everything. Some of the collages have, God knows, like 1,000 pieces and some don't, but I sketch everything out. And then I start with the silhouettes. So I want to make sure the silhouettes are very different and expressive in each piece. And then it's about just making sure that the silhouettes and the sketch kind of goes together. Everything is formatted, it's proportional. And the hardest part for me when I'm doing the collage is, as with even when I paint, would be the color choices, patterns with colors. So I have a massive paper collection, different papers, different weights. These paper come from just different places. As I travel, I just buy them, even if I don't know what I'm going to do with them. So lots and lots of paper, and I go through and I just look at and materials, what will work best. And I just start cutting, adhere everything to canvas. I like to work with larger size canvases and go from there. So that's pretty much the process as far as making the collages and how that works.
Thank you. I'm interested to hear you talk a little bit about how you envision these. You used the word vision. And so is it that sort of coming from subconscious? What do you sort of explore to cultivate those visions? And how would you, if you're able to describe the sort of how they develop in your thoughts and in your creativity?
Yeah, interesting enough. I'm not that type of artist that literally can do one piece after the next piece after the next piece. When I say have a vision, it literally is, it just really depends on how I'm feeling. Sometimes it's just the feeling of, I can see a mother and a child and I say, oh, this is great. I read all the time. So sometimes it may be an image that I see. And I'm like, oh, that'll be a good piece. And then it could be a week or two later where literally I'm saying, this is how it should look. And then I start sketching. And sometimes it depends. I know there's a lot that's been going on in the country. And, so sometimes it's, an emotions that drives like the vision of, okay, this is the piece of artwork that I like to do. I love history, Black history and history in general, as well as politics. I'm a politics nut. So a lot of the pieces, I have a series called Black History as I See It, that incorporates that vision of just different aspects in Black history. So that's where the vision comes from. It literally is just something, it's based on emotion sometimes it's based on an image, and sometimes it's just literally based on what I see at the time, especially when I travel.
I like that. And I think it's always interesting to hear how artists absorb their observations and process and where that comes from. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioning Black history and your interest in history and politics, I think is a good segue to the piece that I selected for my curator's choice. And I, as I said when we opened up and in my comments, I really I liked the connecting of particularly the Black Lives Matter movement with the history that has supported it thus far. And it also makes me think, though, of all the things that still need to happen, that there's progress, but there's not resolution. And so I wondered if you, I mean, that's maybe an open-ended question, but maybe talk a little bit about just sort of connecting this work to the larger themes of the exhibition, and what resonates particularly for you in creating it.
Yeah, this work in particular, it's funny because I actually made it just for the art show, for the exhibition. And I was working on something else. And then I said, no, I want to create something that has to do with voting, the history of voting and African Americans, especially because literally this was made in the month from September to November, right up until the deadline. So we were in that phase of voting. And this piece in particular brings out about, it's kind of like what you mentioned, it talks about the history of the Black vote. It's a timeline. And I didn't want to just draw a timeline, 1876, 1970. I wanted people to look at the artwork and see and get it. And it's interesting that most people, they do, and that's great. And it starts with, for example, the first subject reading. Well, again, when African Americans had the right to vote, there were a number of voting suppression that started even back then, where you had to take a test to make sure you can read in order to vote. So that's why the first figure is reading. And it's a larger piece, so you can't really see all the details like you could in person, but he's reading something that talks about voting. In the next century, of course, African Americans had to pay a poll tax. Well, if you couldn't afford a tax, you couldn't vote. So the next figure is holding a poll tax receipt, all the way up to a ballot. The 60s, the little girl represents the era of the 60s, where women, 50s and 60s, where women really got involved in politics in general, to include Black women, and let my people vote. So of course in the 60s there were a lot of bonnets and those types of things. So this piece, just in a nutshell, shows that timeline of history. It shows the voter suppression. It also shows some African Americans that literally were successful when it came down to politics and voting, as you can see. And of course, when I did this piece, I said, oh gosh, what if Kamala Harris doesn't win? So I just, so I waited for the last individual. I put the Black Lives Matter pin on him, which you may or may not be able to see, but then the ballot, I said, okay, great. All I have to do is just slip this ballot in, it's check Kamala Harris, and that's great. But it still kind of shows, from all the way to, 1876 to now, there's still work that needs to be done. And of course, everyone's waiting in a long line. And that's another tactic for voter suppression. So a lot of people, since it's been shown, I've gotten a lot of emails, and people see different things, which is very interesting in this piece. And it goes along the lines of the theme for Black Lives Matter, because believe it or not, that's one thing that's very important to them, and it's African Americans in voting. And they literally were out there organized to make sure Black people voted, because this is one form of the change that they believe in. So putting that all together, that's the piece.
Well, and thinking about voter suppression still being very much, it's a contemporary problem still. And so I like this thought of this work being a timeline, and especially how, at least in the image that I'm seeing, the way the flag stretches behind as kind of this timeline, and the way there's not, you get the sense that there's a before and an after that's not captured in this, and that's really powerful. I would love to see it in person. I think that, like, I'm appreciating even more, just especially the collage and the sort of tactile quality. I think it's great to see. I think really quickly, I think we just maybe have a couple minutes, but if you could, can I pull up your website real quick? Because I really like how, there's a clear process, but I liked the larger, I love the art, including art with Alvin Ailey and jazz, and then the lesson in art history. I like that you're weaving together this sort of cultural history as well. And if you'd maybe talk about that a little bit as I kind of scroll through.
Yeah, I just feel like what's interesting with African American art is just artists in general, past and present. Most of the well-known artists always have at least one piece that shows the history of art. Jacob Lawrence had the Migration series. Kara Walker, she does a lot of silhouettes and she includes that history piece. So a lot of, like, for me, I can say, yeah, I'm an African-American artist. I'm, engaged in African-American art. But my thing is to add a little bit of history to it, really brings about the African-American part of it for me. It's not just having a Black figure or a woman holding a Black baby. It's just something else historically that I need to add to it. And it makes me feel like, too, I kind of fit in with those well-known African-American artists because it's something that happened, whether it's civil rights or social issues during that time where they created at least that one piece. So for me, like a lesson in art history, in that figure, and of course, the collages are bigger, so it's kind of hard to see all the details, but just like the dress that the woman is wearing and the collage, those are pieces from my favorite artists.
Oh, that's really cool.
Artwork is actually in her dress. So the Romeo Beardens and their Ernie Barnes. And my son loves art as well. So one day I was collaging and well, Mom, what are you doing? And so that piece, of course, made me, and I talked to him about the history of art. So in a lot of my pieces, I do want to not just make a dancer, but I want to talk about Alan Ailey and his history with art. So yes, dancers, but I name it after him. So yeah, and a lot of my pieces have, including that art, including the Black history piece in it, is just amazing to me. And that's what motivates me.
What are you working on now that we are post an election and inauguration and Kamala Harris is the vice president and Stacey Abrams is a hero to many? Are those factoring into upcoming works that you're thinking about?
Yes, there's one that I started working on. I had to stop, and I did the piece that I put in the show. It's called The Great Modern Day Migration. So again, it kind of plays off of Jacob Lawrence, but that's probably going to be one of my favorites. So I don't know if I'm going to even put that up for sale, but I'm going to have to let it go. But so working on that piece now, and then there's another piece with a mother, and she's holding her daughters really tight. And that piece came about recently where there was a young girl in, I think it was high school, and she, got body slammed. And I said, oh my God, you shouldn't do that to kids. And a week later, there was a 9-year-old girl that was tased and handcuffed and thrown in the back of a police car. So that motivated me to say, you know what, sketch it out. That vision came. So it's just a mother, and she's holding her girls really tight. And that's the whole piece. And I really want that to be on a really big oversized collage. But those are the two pieces that I'm working on now.
Well, thank you for giving us a glimpse. And I think we're a bit over our 10 minutes, which I'm grateful for because I love hearing more about your work. And I hope one day post-COVID and all of these crazy things, I can see the work in person. I would love to really capture the details. So thank you so much for sharing with us. It's really nice to meet you.
You too.
Zoom, and congratulations.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.